Guys, this is going to be a start to finish installation guide of fitting the Tema 30mm kit to an XC90. No one's really done it, or the people that haven't really done a very clear video. So we're going to do it today, and first of all we're starting off with the rear, because the rear is where the problems lie. So we're going to first of all go through and undo all the bolts on both sides, so we can make sure everything is removable for the install. The front, we're not too bothered about, it's quite a simple process. So let's get on the back, let's get the wheels off, and let's get going. Okay guys, so before we start, I want to explain a few things. So first of all, I missed out about the actual Tema kit and how that works. So on screen now is going to be a photo explaining how the Tema kit works. So the weird looking, slightly cut, donut shaped ring rubber pieces, they sit on top of the spring. I'm going to show a photo of the spring now in the correct orientation. The bottom of the spring has a sort of oval bottom to it that sort of comes out further than the rest of the spring. Now that is there to help you identify that that is where it sits in the bottom, and also the direction of orientation. So the actual spring end is going to be facing in towards the truck. And that spacer sits on top of the spring and goes into the spring perch before you lift the lower arm up. Now on the front you have these sort of triangular shaped spacers. Now they sit on top of the shocks, and there's one thing you need to do on the front shocks, on the top mounts themselves, and that is to remove the existing smaller studs to then add the larger studs in. So as you can see in the photo, there is the spacer for the top, and there are the longer threaded units that you need to bash out of the top with a hammer or remove from your top mount, and then push the new ones up and through so you can fit the spacer on top of the new shock setup like so. So guys, to remove this, because it hasn't really been shown very well in videos, empty the boot out. This rear section that folds up can stay, but this rear section, you pull it up and then out towards you, and then there's a little cover tray in here that you need to remove. Now that's for this one, which is a 5-seater. For 7-seaters, I'm not 100% sure. Will there be seats in the way? If this was a 7-seater, would there be seats in the way?
Yeah, yes.
Of this, so you'd have to set the seats out?
Yeah, but it's not really that bad because you can slide the seats. Okay. And you would still get to it.
Yeah, just like you said there. But what we're using is an 18mm to get that nut off. And then if you are having problems, it has got a Torx bit head on it to do it that way if you need to. And that's an 18mm both sides. So we made sure we got that one off first because that was the one we were worried about. Now we're going to get it lifted, wheels off, and go underneath and do the rest. That is the untouched side, and then around here we have got the unbolted side. So just be aware when you're taking out the trailing arm that if you've got a side step like this, it will get in the way. So you want to make sure that you use a flexi attachment to get that off, which is somewhere here, like that. Now, I've got to try and remember which ones are which, but you're going to do it in this order. So the top of the shock's already come out, and then we're going to do the trailing arm. Is that a 19?
Trailing arms are trailing arms 17.
17. Yep.
Bottom of the shock 17.
Yep. Just under there. Yep.
And the drop links were 19.
19, yeah. Obviously that's up to you whether you're doing them. I'm doing them while I'm here. As you can see, it all needs quite a refresh. And then what that does is it brings us down low enough to then have a little bit of compression on the springs to get them out. That's all done. We have just spent ages trying to get this down, working why we couldn't. We've loosened this here, which is a is that a 17mm? Yeah. Which is for the other end of the lower arm, and it is just dropped down perfectly. So loosen the other end of the lower arm along with the rest of that to get it all loose and free. Components are out, as you can see, a little worse for wear. Now all of the suspension, apart from the front drop links that we're changing today, everything else is literally brand new. So this is the original rear springs and rear shocks. As you can see, we've had to go to these slightly not right looking skinny ass non self-leveling shocks, which is actually quite a shame. But the problem is when you put these on with the extension, it forces the spring up against it and it rubs, which can damage it. So I've had to go back to standard shocks and springs. And then here is the rear spacer that's going to sit on top of the springs, ready for installation. So that's it all done. I must say a lovely clean-up of the subframe is needed, but it is all in. All I will say is when you come to jack it, you want the jack pulling it this way. So you want the front of the jack here. Because if you don't do that, you'll find you'll be fighting it for hours with no real way of actually making it fit back together.
The geometry's out by a mile.
Yeah, so it is all back in. In terms of what we did on and off, just to quickly summarise very quickly, obviously top off first, then we did the trailing arm, then we did the shock. There's no real difference with these, they can come whenever. And then we did the lower arm on the outside and the inside. Loosened it on the inside, removed the bolt on the outside to drop it down. Fit the new unit, springs, etc. Align it all back up. And then you want to lift it back up. And when you do that, you want to bolt the bottom, lower and inner. And then the trailing arm is when you then would pull, once this is all fixed, you then pull this up and over to there. And then you secure your shock last, which is what we're going to do in just a minute. When we drop it down, we'll go to the top ones. But it is all done. The rear is done. I'm not going to say how long it took us because it was a while, but it should take you a lot less. And we're now going to get onto the front. So guys, like I said, the video was rushed. We ended up basically spending 12 hours or so doing the car because there's no other videos online, so we were sort of working our own initiative. And we did have a few bolts and things that held us back, which wasn't ideal either. So basically, to summarise for the rear, I'm also going to add in photos as we go through, just again to summarise what I've already said, so you know it there true. So obviously, first of all, go into the boot and remove the top nut. We're then going to go down to the trailing arm, which is photoed here. We're going to be going for the larger pronged end of it, and we're going to be removing that. So that is the one that's up in the corner that then you can then drop down. Not the one that's on the hub, but the one that's further up, so that one then drops. At this point, you then have a loose shock, so you can go underneath and remove, as shown, the location of it. You can remove the shock. It's just a dead weight. You can unbolt that. That will drop down. Then all that's left is the lower arm, which is holding the spring in place. The photo here shows the rear lower arm. And the one that's actually on the hub, you unbolt and completely take out. And then the one on the inside of the lower arm, you just loosen to reduce that slack through the lower arm, so it will then drop down and allow the spring to come out. And then quite simply, you then just do it in reverse when you put it all back in. So first of all, obviously you assemble the spring and the cup, the spacer cup in top. You'll then pull the lower arm up as you position it, and then the first aim is to use a jack to pump the lower arm up to lock that in position by bolting that back into the hub. You can then loosen the other side of the lower arm. Once you've obviously tightened up the lower arm and that's all good, you can then work at pushing the shock back up through, so bolting it into the bottom of the lower arm and then up inside the car. It's probably best to sort of bolt it and then wait for the car to drop eventually when you lower it back down and tighten it up when the car's on flat floor, but that's up to you. And then what you will then do is you will then release the jack and the lower arm will hold itself. And then you want to face the jack, so as you're pumping, it's pulling the car or the assembly towards the front of the car. So you want it pumping up like this. And then what that does is it pulls the rear suspension components into alignment, so you can then get the trailing arm back in. If you pump it up, like with it underneath upwards, or with it, you know, with the jack pointing towards the back of the truck, then you're going to find it's going to pull it away and you're able to get that trailing arm back in there. So that is the biggest thing we had. We spent ages trying to work out why we couldn't get it back together, and it turns out we were just basically pumping the jack or the suspension away from where it was meant to actually be going into the trailing arm hole. So yeah, it was a pain in the arse, but that is the guide for the rear. I forgot to do this while this was off. The top are 30mm, they come out last. So you can see my extended units are coming through the top. New shock unit, mine's all built, so I've literally just taken the lug nuts off the top mounts and put the longer ones through. And obviously down here, which is now ridiculous, on here the drop link is a 90mm on the top, 17 on the bottom. That can come off whenever, first or before you take the shock off. And then the shock is a 18 and a 21. 18
nut end and the 21 removal end. It comes out like that. So going in towards the back of the truck. And what you're going to do first is remove the shock and drop link first, and then the top last. And it is as simple as that. So yeah, that is looking pretty high, and we'll see the outcome when it's all settled and sorted tomorrow.
So as you can see with the front, we were so focused on getting it done because we're running out of light that I didn't actually record the process. So what you want to do first is obviously take the wheel off. That's quite self-explanatory. So the first thing we want to do is remove the drop link. Now, you don't necessarily have to remove the whole drop link, but just remove the lower section of the drop link that takes it off of the anti-roll bar. So when you come to then take the shock off, you can remove it. So the bottom nut for that is a 17mm, and the top nut for that, which is on the shock assembly, is a 19mm. Once they're then off, or you've got the bottom one off, so it's separated away from the anti-roll bar, you can then remove the two bolts which are on the bottom of the shock. You can see them as you look down to the shock at the top of the hub. You'll see them going through with a nut, top and bottom, one for each of the bolts going through. Two of those, you can remove those as well. Bear in mind the nut end is larger than the bolt end, so you need two sort of alternate sized spanners, ratchets, etc. for that. We actually had to use a breaker bar, original suspension on that sort of mileage. It was difficult, 2 breaker bars, like 1 each to get it off. It was nuts. And then once you have removed the shock, you're basically left with the shock assembly dangling by the 3 bolts that bolt the top mount up in the engine bay. So you can waz those off and you can pull your shock down. And then all you're quite simply doing is doing that again in reverse. You're putting your shock with your extended lugs and spacer back up in. When you position that, you obviously want to hand tight the 3 in first, so the shock's sort of in a rough position but has movement. And then you're going to use that movement along with prying down the lower arm on the front suspension assembly to be able to get the shock bolts back in line with the hub. That takes a lot of wiggling room, but when they're then back in together, you can put the 2 bolts through on the bottom of the shock, and then the shock is then fixed in place. Tighten the 3 at the top, tighten the 2 on the bottom, and then you're only left with your drop link again at the end, which is either 1 or 2 nuts. I'm hoping that was a little bit more helpful than what I recorded a little bit earlier, but I thought I'd add both in there just because they're both helpful in terms of telling you sizes that you need for your correct parts as well.
So, we haven't driven it yet, so it probably will drop a bit. We're going to go for a drive now, and then I'm going to get back in sometime in the next few days. Going to get the measuring tape out and measure it 100% so we know what we've gained from it, but it's looking pretty nuts compared to, well, a quick gauge, a fist, and a quick gauge, a head. That's 2 fists, or my fists anyway. But
a double fister.
Yeah, looking great. Here it is, and it is done. The 30mm lift. Now, I'm quite short, so you're going to see that this is now quite a bit taller than me. And I think it looks great. Now, some of you might say I've ruined it, and that's understandable if you think that, but I think it looks amazing. And we have actually got a huge arch gap, both front and rear, compared to standard. Now, all the scientific nitty-gritty bits and measurements are all going to be at the end. So if you're here for that, I want to see the height increase we've gained over the original height with the added tyre height, and then compared to standard when it was on the 20-inch rims, which I'll put a photo of in here now once again. We can then see the improvement with the tyres and the suspension lift all together, and I must say it looks tremendous. I do somewhat apologise for the fairly lacking video instructions. It wasn't the best. Ended up taking us all day for a variety of reasons, but I'm hoping that video will be helpful in you installing your 30mm lift, or at least watching this bit will help you decide whether you want to do it or not. And yeah, I am 5'8", and this is the height that it actually is. It is crazy. So as you can see, I've got 2 fists, rather small, but 2 fists, and we have basically got 2 fists here, and then on the front, I think we're not far off, a fist and a half. And what I've also done while we've done this, as you've seen in the video anyway, is replace the front shock assembly, springs, shocks, top mounts, front drop links. But on the rear, we have done new springs, shocks, and drop links again. And that is the final look and the final product of it. I'm going to do a little walk around now, show how it looks from all different angles, and then we'll get to measuring the actual improvement gained. So guys, here we are. Let's do a little walk around. So as you can see, it's pretty jacked. Now I've actually been off-road with the car and tested it all out, obviously put the suspension through its tests, and it has really improved in two main areas. Now the two main areas I've seen of an improvement is, so obviously ground clearance is the first thing, and we are definitely definitely getting it from this. As you can see, if we drop down low here, we've got some decent height under there now. And secondly, because the suspension's now been pushed down, it means that the suspension's actually always more in contact with the floor than it used to be. So we do have a bit more of an improved grip as well. But there we are, the final setup. So this is a set of 17-inch rims on a 265/65/17 tyre, running 20mm spacers front and rear. We'll show you some side profile. The rear actually tucks in quite nicely. The front, on the other hand, is debatably close, but I think is still within the legal realms. We'll get right down the side there. As you can see, for the top of the arch, we're just in. And that is it with the 30mm lift. As you can see, peering through here, we have the new shocks and springs, and they have the 30mm lifter spacer on top of the shock. So the front is quite an easy installation, and the rear has a spacer in the top of the rear spring that actually I don't think you will see when I pan under here now. I don't actually think you will see it. So yeah. As you can see, the rear suspension is in need, as I mentioned in the previous video, of a refresh. But we have got new shock springs and drop links. And as I said, I went off-road at the weekend and it proved to be an excellent upgrade. So guys, I'm going to go, with no further ado, go and park up and measure it, and we'll look at the final gain from lifting your XC90 on the 30mm Tema lift kit. So you're probably asking, how does it drive? Now, in terms of drivability, I would say, obviously, it's hard to tell because we've replaced all the suspension on top of doing the spacer lift. But overall, it's completely transformed the drive. First of all, it is much better on the road. At higher speeds, it's definitely not as wallowy as it used to be. But more importantly, the only real difference you're going to see day to day is that there will be a bit of a firmer, almost bouncy feeling as you're going down the road. So bumps will be a bit harder, bumps will be a bit firmer, and you do lose a bit of that plush softness from the suspension setup. But overall, it's worth it for the gains of the height that come with it.